Hey everybody, we are here just outside of East Palestine, Ohio, in Darlington, Pennsylvania. I'm here with Christina. Christina has been dealing with the effects of the derailment here just like everybody else has. We're roughly 6 or so miles from the derailment site at this point, right?
Yep, 5.9.
5.9. So obviously with the big, chemical plume that was set off during the controlled burn, that sent all sorts of chemicals, debris, and the byproducts of chemicals on board that train all over the place, well beyond the city limits of East Palestine, well beyond the state line of Ohio, obviously. I guess to start back from the beginning, this is our first time talking, so what was the first you heard of the derailment? How did you find out about it, and kind of what happened from then?
I was putting my son to bed the night that it happened and went and looked at my phone to see what was going on, and went on Facebook and found out there was a post on there from the local people talking and stuff that there had been a train derailment in East Palestine and it involved a gas station. And so immediately I was like, oh no, because there's so many gas stations near the train tracks. And so then I got up and I went and told my dad about it, and he went to go outside, and I followed him. And when we went outside, like, we're in the middle of the woods, and so through the trees looking towards East Palestine, you could still see flames and smoke, and that's, you usually don't see that out here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So he came in and he called our other neighbor and told him East Palestine's on fire, because it looked like the whole town was on fire. And after that, we kind of just like monitored everything through the night.
Mm-hmm.
I was up until about 4 o'clock the next day in the morning, and just watching to see if everything was going to be okay, or if they were going to start evacuating even us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was the first night.
Yeah, and then I guess obviously fast forward a little bit. Ultimately, the decision was made to do the controlled burn.
Yeah.
Nothing about that really has looked controlled to me or anybody else. To me, that looks more like a explosion of everything there. There's a whole bunch of questions surrounding that that we don't need to get into right now, I guess. But at that point, this fire was now much, much, much bigger, sending the massive, images of the chemical plume that we've all seen at this point, that spread for miles and miles and miles. Were you able to see some of that from here, and what kind of effects did that bring to you here, even almost 6 miles, or almost 6 miles away from the derailment site?
The morning of the controlled burn, I was getting ready to take my son to school, and I heard over Facebook again, everything, like the most that we were hearing was over social media rather than through the news or the government and stuff. And so over social media, people started talking about them possibly blowing up some of the rail cars, and I was like, I don't know about sending my kid to school. So like 15 minutes before I had to leave to take him to school, the Blackhawk School District decided to evacuate their students, and then his preschool decided that they weren't going to have kids come in for the afternoon classes, and they were going to evacuate the ones that were there. And so then I decided that I needed to go up and make sure we had enough food for our animals to go up to Chippewa. So we ran up there real quick in case we weren't allowed to leave after it happened. So when I got up there were black police vehicles, unmarked police vehicles, driving around with their lights on, and traffic was really heavy up there, like waiting in a traffic jam in Chippewa doesn't normally happen.
Right.
And so then we came home, and they were saying at first that they were going to do it at 3 o'clock. Later on we found out they wanted to do it at like noon or 12:30. But then at around 3, they decided that they wanted to do it. And then, even then, like, we had started watching the news and stuff, and even then, they still didn't do it. And we heard that they wanted to do it before it got dark and before the inversion was in place in the atmosphere. But then they didn't do it until 4:30.
Right.
And from here...
So it seemed like there was all sorts of... there wasn't a lot of direct information coming to residents.
No.
Like, there wasn't like a, hey, you know, no one came around door to door. No one, I mean, did you, I've seen some people got text messages. Did you get a text message or anything?
Yeah, we got the emergency alert like you normally would for like an Amber Alert.
Mm-hmm.
We got that emergency alert
Mm-hmm.
that people were being evacuated.
Okay.
But it kept saying a 1 mile radius.
Right. So to you, you're sitting here.
Like, oh,
it's like, okay, we're 6 miles away. We're
Yeah.
clearly far enough, outside of the situation. So that seems like a lot of red flags there. There's a lot of chaos kind of happening, not knowing what's going to happen, and that information really not getting out to folks.
Right.
Yeah.
And I still debated on leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we talked to our neighbors, and they were debating on leaving. And I really thought about leaving. I looked at, like, hotels to go to, or my son, he has a grandmother that's pretty far away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. So I was just like, well, where are we going to go? And so we decided to stay, and I was like, well, we'll stay and see if we get blown away. Because there was a guy on the news that works in hazmat. He's been working in hazmat for like 30 or more years, and he said he's never seen this done.
Right.
So it's like, well, how well is this going to go?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it seems like in a lot of cases they probably didn't know how it was going to go.
Right.
I mean, I reported on this a couple weeks ago now, but after one of the town hall meetings that happened in East Palestine, the EPA representative there admitted that the EPA only did modeling for a vent and burn of one car, one train car. And on Sunday night, that's what the plan was. And then miraculously Monday morning, plan changed. Now it's 5 cars. The EPA says they weren't part of that decision. Right. And there was no modeling done. And people who are 5 miles away instead of 1 mile away are sitting there wondering, okay, should I leave? Should I stay here? What do I do when clearly this explosion now is 5 times as large?
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm not the one to do this sort of thing, but if you're blowing up 5 times as much chemicals on board this train, highly flammable chemicals, should the area have been much further, right? So lots of questions, I guess, early on there. On the Pennsylvania side here, obviously this is tricky because it's spread over 2 states. You've got, if this derailment happened 500 feet further down the tracks, essentially, we'd be talking about Darlington, Pennsylvania, instead of East Palestine, Ohio, being the main name behind this. Obviously, folks in Darlington, such as yourself, and many others we've talked to, are needing to deal with all of this, even though in a lot of cases they're not getting some of the same resources that are available to folks in Ohio. But I guess, what has the process been like for you in dealing with getting any sort of assistance? I know you've got concerns over your water here, things like that. How has that kind of process been playing out?
Well, I've been to down to the clinic, or a couple times I went to the clinic that was set up in Darlington, and they had a sign-up sheet to get on water testing and soil testing. And so we went down, we got on the sign-up sheet, and then the next time I went down to the clinic, my dad went to see if we were still on it, and they didn't have our names on there. So then another time we went down to one of the open houses that they had in Darlington, and we went to check to see if, where we were at on the sign-up sheet, and we weren't on the sign-up sheet.
Gotcha. And this is for testing, like urine
for
testing,
water,
or for water testing?
Water
or
and soil.
Water and soil testing, okay.
And
so you had been putting your name on the list to get it, and then when you go to check in on it,
Yeah.
you're not there anymore.
Right. So that's kind of odd.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just the other day mentioned that to the EPA as well, and they found it odd.
Mm-hmm.
But then just the other day, I talked to a guy from the Pennsylvania environmental protection people, and he had said that they were not going to test outside the 2 miles because they had not found anything of concern in the 2 miles. But when you go on their website, they already have testing that they've done outside the 2 miles.
Right.
And so, why aren't we getting a test done?
Right, and it seems like, too, again, no expert here, but when you look at the drone footage of how massive and widespread that chemical plume of smoke went, you don't need to be an expert to know that these chemicals moved in the air.
Yeah.
A lot of folks that have experts I talk with have described the situation even with, like, dioxin. Dioxin is heavier than air. When that explosion and controlled burn first happened, the dioxins were launched up into the air with the thermal, energy lifting it up, spreading out in those big black clouds among countless other chemicals involved and byproducts of the chemicals that were set on fire, and then all slowly start to settle everywhere. It seems to me like the least that could be done, especially for folks. I mean, we're not that far away. We were in East Palestine 12 minutes before we got here, basically. This is a very close proximity to where this happened, and it doesn't make any sense to not, even if they're right and your water is fine, just for the peace of mind.
Right.
Just do the tests. I guess, where is it being held up? Do you think it's at the state of Ohio, or sorry, the state of Pennsylvania? Do you think it's a Norfolk Southern thing? I mean, have you hit any particular roadblocks in this? Or
I'm not sure where their decision is coming from, because the EPA just the other day they extended their area for water testing down into Negley, and here we're like by air,
right,
3 miles from Negley,
right,
and it's a little further if you're driving, but like the chemicals in the air and in the water, they don't care where they go.
right,
And with like the night of the controlled burn, they, like, you could see the smoke from here, and as evening came, it's weird that they did it when they did it to me, because it got dark not long after they did it.
right,
And so, like, at midnight, I went outside, and you couldn't see the moon and the stars, and the wind was supposed to be blowing in our direction then. And then at like 2 a.m, I went out, and you could see the moon and the stars, and the wind had shifted direction, going towards Chippewa and the town of Darlington,
yep,
and up towards Enon Valley. But, like, so numerous times I've gone to people and said, hey, that wind blew towards us. And they're like, they've even heard from the government saying that South Beaver, where we're actually at, we weren't affected. But, like, how are you not affected when the wind is blowing towards you? The creeks, they run down this way.
right,
And then there's also been fracking under the ground that went all directions. So, like, then you also see this plume.
right,
And how are you not affected? And then you're sick.
right. Yeah, so I guess to the health side of it, I mean, have you or any of your family, close friends, how have the symptoms been for you? Have you experienced, I guess, what did you experience initially when it first happened? Yeah. And is anything kind of been more persistent and will continue to flare up?
On February 5th, I started getting sick. So that's like the day before the controlled burn.
Gotcha.
And I started with just like a cough, like a slight cough. And So
And at that point, too, I mean, there's still a lot of fire and smoke coming from this, as chemicals were burning already at that point. But go ahead, sorry.
And so I started with a cough, and then a bit of a headache, and then the right after they did the burn, I was like coughing nonstop and migraine, and that, like, I had a migraine and coughing, coughing, a sore throat, like congestion in here. My ears felt like they had pressure in them, and that lasted like every day until maybe like last week. And
wow, so that's, I mean,
that's a long
time.
time.
Yeah.
And like the when you go to the doctor, they'll say to you, did you do a COVID test? I've done 3 COVID tests. It's not COVID.
Right.
But so they ended up, I went to the doctor 4 times, and they ended up diagnosing me with upper respiratory infection and exposure to chemicals that are non-occupational. And then off and on through that time too, my son had a lot of coughing and runny nose. Here and there he'd get like a redness around his mouth and his nose. But then for a few days in there we had like vomiting, diarrhea, and whenever you go like up to town, or we were in New Galley one day, and New Galley's pretty far away. And you can, especially in New Galley, as soon as we stepped out of the car, you could smell stuff, smell chemicals. And then I ended up pretty sick that night with like nausea. My stomach was hurting. And then different places you go, and even different days you go, you can taste chemicals on your lips or in your mouth.
Yeah.
Can we stop a second there?
Huh?
In New Galley, we went to a meeting, and the trains just kept coming, one after the other. Every time a new one comes through, it freshens up the smell.
Yeah.
It freshens up the chemical smell.
Yep.
So those people there in that little town, it's another just quaint little town. East Palestine's a little bigger, but that's now a wreck.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I the first trip that I had in East Palestine, speaking of every time a train coming by, kind of kicking up more of this sort of stuff, I experienced some of that speaking with a resident who lives near the tracks, and there were trains going by almost every 15 minutes or so at that point, because they were still playing catch up with when they had the tracks closed. And at the end of that, I did an interview with 4 folks for about an hour, and at the end of it, I was out of breath, and like, I mean, I'm a talker, so for me to be out of breath from talking was not normal. And I mean, every time the trains were going by, who knows what was getting kind of kicked up and into this, and that's part of some of the issue going on now with folks, where they're still, now they're just shifting over to the other side of the tracks. They've removed the soil from one side of it, but now they're digging up the whole other side of the tracks still, and it will be kind of a continuing, ongoing issue there.
Yeah, I don't look forward to that.
No. I guess I wanted to ask you about this too, because this is something we're speaking with other residents about, regarding the vinyl chloride tests for humans. So like it's a urine test for vinyl chloride. You have actually gone and done that test just today, so we don't have the results yet.
Right.
But I guess, do you want to talk about the process of going through and doing that? I know a lot of folks have had a difficult time trying to get these urine tests.
Yeah, I heard from people that when they would go to their doctor or even to the hospital, that they couldn't get a prescription to get it done, because they tell you, well, it's been too long. And the other day, last week, I had been able to get a prescription from a local doctor, and he had told me the whole process. Like, you go in there and just give them the prescription. Actually, when I called to get the prescription, they didn't even have vinyl chloride in their computers. They had to ask me for the code for it. And so when I gave them that code, as soon as I gave it to them, they found it. And so today I went down to the lab that they sent us to, and I was able to get it there. There was no problem when I walked in at all. And then we just wait now. They didn't even
Right.
tell you like how long it would be or anything. But the other day, I was talking to a guy from the Pennsylvania Environmental Protection people, and through our conversation, the people testing positive for vinyl chloride had come up, and he had said to me he didn't understand why people were getting this test done now, because it should be out of our systems. And I said, well, what about this metabolite? And because that's what's going to be in your urine. And so he was like, well, that shouldn't be there anymore either. So whatever labs you're using must be scamming you. And these are the same labs our primary care doctors use for any other test.
Right.
So chances are pretty small that they're going to be scamming you.
Yeah, that's an outrageous claim, because these are the same, right, to your point, these are the same labs that, like, anyone who ever has a blood test done, anyone who ever, needs to go to the hospital
Yeah.
and have, like, these are the labs that do
Right.
that. The major red flag is that if people are testing positive for vinyl chloride, which they are, I just spoke with a resident who she had the highest one that I'd seen so far.
Yeah.
And she's not the only one who has tested positive for
Right.
this. Experts that I'm talking to are saying, like, you know what, it isn't a perfect test, no. However, given the amount of people who are now testing positive for vinyl chloride in their urine, and the likelihood of all of these people all being exposed via a different route of exposure to something else, when clearly you had this massive explosion in this town releasing all sorts of chemicals, some of these chemicals very likely still being prevalent as they're digging up. That could be the question mark, is because the gentleman is right that you spoke with, or the woman who was right that you spoke with, that it shouldn't be in your system anymore if it was from back in the beginning of February.
Yeah.
Even the metabolite is called thiodiglykolic acid. I've spoken with somebody who's kind of given me some advice on how to talk about some of this stuff a little bit better, but so that is the metabolite for vinyl
Right.
chloride. When you ingest it, it should only be there for a couple days. The fact that folks today and in the last couple of weeks are still testing positive for vinyl chloride in their urine means that they're still being exposed to it somehow.
Yep.
And a massive failure that's happened here is initially the CDC is telling people you don't need to get this test. You don't need to get this test. The state of Ohio, when they first had their clinic open in East Palestine, wasn't doing any testing of any kind. Experts that I'm talking to are saying that if right when this derailment happened, those tests were being done, and we had weeks of testing data from people over time actually going and having these, we would have a whole bunch more information if you were doing weekly tests, and you can track, okay, people are at this level this week, and then each week it's going down. That means, okay, maybe you're not being exposed anymore. But if you're getting random spikes throughout, but unfortunately, because the CDC and the EPA and all these organizations were telling people, nah, you don't need to get tested for this. You don't worry about it. Testing, that's don't worry about that right now. You worry about you, blah 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 blah. Now we don't have any of that critical data, unfortunately. It's good that people are getting the tests now. It is showing that seemingly there's enough of these folks who are testing positive for it that there is still exposure to vinyl chloride in town. But without that, that data would have been great to have. There would have been much more that we'd be able to learn from all of this. But instead, these officials seemingly like, if we don't test for it, then it doesn't exist. Because that's what it seems like to me, is the decision made, well, if we don't test for it, then these people don't have it. It doesn't exist anymore. And then now, 3 months later, folks are having to go and get these urine tests done, and are testing positive, unfortunately. Yeah, it's certainly things are still not right in this area right now. I guess, is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation here? Otherwise, I really appreciate you taking the time to reach out.
Well, I think one thing is I think people should still stay away from the creeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because just a few days ago I went down the creek, and a lot of people have seen another gentleman going around and poking around in the creek
Mm-hmm.
to see what comes up. But I went down there to see for myself, and when you first look at the creek, I mean, it's still like black, just looking at it. But when you go down there and you start poking around in places, you still get this like white sheen that comes up, and you flip over rocks, and it just like oozes out of the sediment and off of the rocks. But I recently got a respirator to go down with, but even that, you can still feel like your eyes burning. And so the creeks are still really bad. And I've talked to people at the EPA, and they're not sure yet how they're going to fix it, because they've said that it's in the surrounding soil at the creek now, and up in Sulphur Run, it's so bad that they might not be able to fix it.
Right, which is outrageous, especially considering Sulphur Run essentially runs like through the middle of town.
Yeah.
It's kind of bizarre without seeing it, but Sulphur Run literally runs in tunnels under people's homes, yards, under like the municipal building, and like it runs right through the center of town. I've spoken with residents who grew up like playing in the creek essentially, and that's definitely not something that folks are going to be able to do anytime soon, for sure. Maybe ever, unfortunately.
Right.
It's thing after thing after thing has been kind of mishandled, kicked the can down the road. Any rock you flip over, essentially, well, literally and figuratively, I guess, there are more issues.
Even like every rock you turn over, you say, like, that's not just literally rocks. You go to the government, your representatives, and you ask them, like, what are you going to do for this town? What are you going to do for the surrounding area? And every rock you turn over, nobody has answers. And they're like, no matter which side you go to, they're not really doing anything.
I'm curious have you had any success in trying to reach out to local officials?
I reached out to our local, what are they called?
Your state representative, or
the township
gotcha.
commissioners,
okay.
even. Because I was like, well, is there anything you guys can do? And they said, unfortunately, we're kind of like in the same boat you are. We have the same phone numbers as you do, and we can't really do anything. And then, so they reached out to our local representative, and then I reached out to him too. And I went and reached out to him, like, I think 3 times. The third time I left a voicemail that was like, I need somebody to call me back.
Right.
And I'd prefer it to be the representative, but just somebody.
Right.
So his secretary ended up calling me back, and then we had talked about my concerns and concerns I've seen in my community. And then she was supposed to get back to me last Wednesday. She still hasn't. And so I called them again on Friday, and they were out of town, opening up a new building for him in another county. And I've reached out to the senators, just more recently Fetterman in PA, because he wasn't around for a long time. And then the governor I've reached out to, and nobody responds. And everybody else is doing the same things.
Right. And unfortunately, it doesn't sound much better in Ohio either from folks I'm talking with. There was a lot of talk about 2 months ago about some even just some sort of like new legislation to prevent something from happening again in the future. But even that doesn't seem like
No.
it's going anywhere, unfortunately. You know, it's so nothing's being done on the ways to prevent this from happening in the future. Nothing's being done to help folks like you and folks in and around this area, East Palestine. So it's failing on both fronts of like, sure, this happened here 3 months ago, but we're literally doing nothing to prevent it from happening in any other small town in the future again right now.
And you bring that up, it reminds me too, I'm not sure if you guys have talked to anybody in Indiana where the fire happened there. And I reached out to somebody there too, and it's the same plan that they're going through out there. Like, they go to get answers, they don't get calls back, and they're still out there, asbestos everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're being told it's safe to go home.
that one is bad also, and I reached out to EPA to answer questions on that basically immediately, and it was clear that they didn't have any plan because they couldn't answer any questions. And you know, I knew a lot more of what to ask now after covering what's happened to you all here. And you know, I was like, okay, well, what's the plan for people returning home? Are you doing in-home residential air tests? Are you swabbing people's surfaces to tell them it's okay? You literally said that there was benzene and what was it? The cyanide, another chemical in the air that were both
Kills right away.
Yeah, they kill you, exactly. And you just let people move back into this neighborhood without
are sick exactly the same symptoms we have, and some of the chemicals are the same chemicals that we had.
And that too. I mean, it's a chemist that I'd speak with quite a bit said to me he described the amount of chemicals and chemical byproducts as essentially limitless was his words, because he's like, there's not a manifest of all of the different types of plastics inside of that building. He described it as limitless, and at one point he even said, you know, it'll be a smaller footprint there, but he said, I would almost rather at this point live over here than live in Indiana in that neighborhood, because it's so bad. You know, not discounting either of them. They're both obviously horrible tragedies. This one's affecting a whole lot more people, but terrible situation. But yeah. Well, I guess is there anything else that you want to add? Otherwise, I won't take much more of your time here.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Let's stay in touch. I'm sure folks would love to follow up and see how things are going in the future. Hopefully, you're able to get your well tests done, and let us know when you get the results of your vinyl chloride test. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.